Hello, I'm Robert Horton, a member of the National Society of Film Critics and the programmer historian in residence at Scarecrow Video. I'm pleased to say that here in the end stages of 2021, we are enjoying what we call a semester in Scarecrow Academy, a discussion series presented by Scarecrow Video in Seattle, devoted this time to the art in noir, film noir, and the director. We're coming up to our final session on Saturday. They've been happening on Saturday afternoons at 2 p.m. Pacific time, as indeed this one will. A series with an emphasis on the art of the director in noir. I want to say that you don't have to have attended any previous sessions to join us for this final one. It's a free series. The series takes place via Zoom, and you can go to the Scarecrow Academy page if you are not there at this moment and find the link. Scarecrow will email you back and tell you how to join us for the Zoom session. Our final meeting takes place on Saturday, November 20th, as I said, 2 p.m. Pacific time, for a conversation about Yvonne Passer's 1981 film, Cutter's Way. Well, because I'm here and because you're there, why don't I introduce the movie now? This movie remains rather obscure by comparison to some of the other titles in our series, although I know it has a following, and the people who love it really, really love it. And I am among them. Its source is a novel, Cutter and Bone, written by Newton Thornburg and published in 1976. The movie was also originally titled Cutter and Bone on its first release. The book is excellent, and I recommend it, although in my opinion, the people who adapted it, including the screenwriter Jeffrey Allen Fiskin and the producer Paul Gurian, were wise in changing the final third of the book, which had Alex Cutter and Richard Bone embarking on a road trip to chase their white whale, and the movie instead just keeps everything contained to the setting of Santa Barbara in Southern California. The film remains one of two great movies directed by Yvonne Passer, whose other films sort of have they run a kind of frustrating gamut, I guess, from fascinating oddities to some out and out duds, unfortunately. Passer was born in Prague in the then Czechoslovakia in 1933. He died in 2020. Along with his friend Milos Forman, he was a part of the Czech New Wave of filmmaking in the 1960s. Having worked on the screenplays of a couple of the key Forman films from that period, and also directing his own feature, Intimate Lighting, in 1965. And that is the other unequivocally great movie that Passer directed. Wonderful and wise comedy that I wholeheartedly advise you to seek out. Passer had been in the U.S. for over a decade when he had the job on Cutter and Bone. So the title change, by the way, came about when the first New York release of the movie just completely flopped in March 1981. It opened exactly 2 months after the inauguration of Ronald Reagan, as the nation was bathing itself in the fantasy of Morning in America, the worst possible time for a movie like this to arrive. The studio then handed it off to a specialty distribution a couple of months later, which did give it new life and a new title. I regret the new title, but I sort of understand why they did that. And the film was critically embraced, and it enjoyed an especially enthusiastic reception and a nice long run too in Seattle at the time. Although I'm not sure that did much to make the film break even, actually. For some years, I've been going around saying that Cutter's Way is the last great film of the 1970s, that period of very interesting and risk-taking work in American cinema. And I've been looking around online recently, and there are some other people who have said that exact same thing about it, which is all to the good, I think, and a fine realization, because it does fit in with the feeling and the attitude of a strain of American film from that decade. The disenchantment, the anger, the 60s hangover that was going on, the price of Vietnam and other disillusionments. The noirish part of the movie begins with Richard Bone, who's played by Jeff Bridges, seeing something one night. And it turns out that what he saw was the body of a young woman being dumped in an alley. This noirish setup that prevails in the early scenes I think sort of shifts into something with an almost mythic status, indeed the dialogue of the film sort of underscores this, when Bone tentatively identifies a possible culprit from that dark alley in a local fat cat by the name of J.J. Cord, a notion that is then seized on by Bone's best friend, Alexander Cutter, played by John Hurd, a furious and abrasive veteran who is missing an eye, an arm, and a leg. Complicating things is that Bone, whose golden boy studliness and cowardice is just superbly captured by Jeff Bridges, is infatuated with Mo, Alex's wife, beautifully played by Lisa Eichhorn. As the quest goes on, it becomes clear, although clear is not something that ever happens in this movie. Nothing becomes clear here. It becomes clear that the murder of a young woman has become an excuse for our band to get the rich guy, who it is possible may not actually be guilty of the murder. And yet he is guilty of something. We know it just as much as Alex does. The quest itself takes on its own momentum, and it snaps our characters into life and focus in contrast to the sort of hazy, drowsy world in which they had been living. The texture of that world is wonderfully captured, not just in the photography by Jordan Cronenweth and the haunting music of Jack Nitzsche, using glass instruments in a especially woozy way, but also in the distinctive and truthful performances, particularly by the central trio of actors, none of whom has been better, quite possibly. So, people call anything film noir now. If it's a crime film, or if light is sneaking through Venetian blinds in some corner of a room, somebody's going to call it a noir, and maybe give it a little hipness in the public eye, I guess, through that. Perhaps Cutter's Way is only tangentially a film noir, but I was thinking about it. We might say that there's a film noir that's sort of lurking in the past of these characters, something to do with J.J. Cord and the parents of Alex and his friend George, something noirish that even took place during the heyday of film noir, if the math works out on that. It's only briefly mentioned in one scene. But it kind of sits there, in the past, and it sounds like it might have been a story out of a James M. Cain novel, or even Chinatown, perhaps. So when we gather, perhaps we'll talk a little bit about that, and finally about the film, how the film seems to address an elusive subject, which is ambiguity itself, and how wised up people who can no longer believe in certainties like God or the American dream or the system have to live in an ambiguous world, and the toll that takes, and how much they might need the fictions that they sometimes create or latch onto, as Alex Cutter does here, right up to, indeed, the final seconds of the movie, which refuse to settle the ambiguity, but leave us locked into it. An ending that makes a perfect conclusion to our study of neo-noir, combining the uncertainty of the ending of Point Blank, the gratifying gunshot at the end of The Long Goodbye, and the bleakness of the ending of Chinatown. So we will bring our Art in Noir series to a fittingly powerful finish, and I hope you will join us for the same when we gather on Saturday, November 20th, for a conversation about neo-noir and Yvonne Passer's 1981 film, Cutter's Way.